January 26, 1970, 11:47 p.m. The International Hotel showroom in Las Vegas was electric. 2,000 people packed into a space designed for 1,500. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, expensive perfume, and anticipation. Elvis Presley stood under the blazing spotlight, sweat glistening on his forehead, his white jumpsuit catching every beam of light like armor forged from starlight. He had just finished All Shook Up. The crowd was screaming. Women were crying. Men were standing on their chairs. Elvis was back. After a decade of forgettable movies, the king of rock and roll had returned to the stage, and Las Vegas was witnessing the resurrection of a god. But then something happened. Elvis looked into the front row. His eyes scanned the sea of faces, the diamonds, the tuxedos, the tears. And then he froze. His hand, which had been reaching for the microphone, stopped in midair. His confident smile faltered. For a moment, the king of rock and roll looked like a teenage boy who had just seen his hero walk into the room, because sitting in the front row, holding a glass of what appeared to be scotch but was almost certainly apple juice, was Dean Martin. The king of cool had come to see the king of rock and roll, and Elvis Presley was about to do something that no one in that room expected. Something that would reveal a secret he had carried since he was a dirt poor kid in Tupelo, Mississippi. To understand why Elvis Presley trembled at the sight of Dean Martin, you have to go back 22 years. You have to leave the glittering showrooms of Las Vegas and travel to a tiny shotgun house on Old Saltillo Road in Tupelo, Mississippi. The year is 1948. Elvis Aaron Presley is 13 years old. He is poor, not struggling poor, not making ends meet poor, dirt poor. The kind of poor where dinner is sometimes a wish and breakfast is a memory. The Presley family owned almost nothing, but they had a radio, and every night, young Elvis would sit in front of that crackling box, his ear pressed against the speaker, listening to the sounds that floated through the static like messages from another world. He heard gospel from the church down the road. He heard blues drifting from the juke joints on the black side of town. He heard country from the Grand Ole Opry, but there was one voice that stopped him cold. One voice that made him close his eyes and dream of a life beyond the cotton fields, and the poverty and the shame of being a Presley in a town that looked down on families like his. That voice belonged to Dean Martin. When Dean Martin sang, Elvis heard something he had never heard before. He heard confidence. He heard ease. He heard a man who sounded like he didn't have a care in the world. Dean Martin didn't beg for your attention like some singers did. He didn't demand it like others. He simply existed, cool and relaxed, and the world came to him. Elvis wanted that. God, how he wanted that. He would stand in front of the cracked mirror in the bathroom, a broken comb in his hand, and try to slick his hair back like Dean Martin. He would practice that half smile, that lazy drawl, that effortless charm. He would sing "That's Amor" to his reflection, trying to capture that smooth, buttery tone that seemed to flow from Dean Martin's throat like honey from a jar. But there was a problem. Elvis was a natural blonde. His hair was the color of dirty straw, the color of poverty, the color of a boy who would never escape Tupelo. So Elvis made a decision that would change his image forever. He dyed his hair black. Not just black, blue black, the same obsidian shade that Dean Martin had in those Technicolor movies that played at the Lyric Theater downtown. Elvis would sneak into the theater through the back door, find a seat in the shadows, and watch Dean Martin on the screen. He studied everything. The way Dean held a cigarette, the way Dean walked, the way Dean looked at a woman like she was the only person in the room. By the time Elvis was 18, he had transformed himself. The blonde boy from Tupelo was gone. In his place was a dark-haired young man with a smoldering gaze and a voice that combined the gospel he learned in church, the blues he heard on Beale Street, and the smooth crooning of his idol, Dean Martin. In 1953, Elvis walked into Sun Records in Memphis to record an acetate disc. Sam Phillips, the owner, wasn't there, but his office manager, Marion Kiesker, was. She asked Elvis to sing something. He launched into a ballad. Marion listened. She tilted her head. Something was familiar about this kid's style. The way he phrased the words. The lazy, confident delivery. The smooth baritone that seemed too polished for a teenager from nowhere. If he was going to sound like anybody, Marion later recalled, it was going to be Dean Martin. She meant it as an observation. But for Elvis, it was the highest compliment he had ever received. Over the next 2 years, Elvis would cover Dean Martin's song, I Don't Care If the Sun Don't Shine. He would pattern his performance of Love Me Tender after Dean's romantic ballad style. He would borrow arrangements, vocal techniques, and that indefinable quality that made Dean Martin the coolest man in America. Elvis became a star, then a superstar, then a phenomenon, but he never stopped being a fan. The problem was, Elvis had never told Dean Martin any of this. They had crossed paths a few times in Hollywood. Brief handshakes, polite nods, professional courtesy between two men who ruled different kingdoms of the entertainment world. Dean was the king of cool. Elvis was the king of rock and roll. The press treated them as rivals, as representatives of different generations and different genres, but Elvis knew the truth. There would be no king of rock and roll without the king of cool. The closest they had come to a real conversation was in 1960. On the Paramount lot, Elvis was filming G.I. Blues. Dean was working on another picture. Elvis had just gotten out of the army, his career in a precarious position, his future uncertain. He was riding a bicycle between soundstages when he saw Dean Martin standing outside a dressing room with a young girl. Elvis stopped. He got off the bike. His heart was pounding. This was the man he had worshipped since he was 13 years old. The man whose voice had given him hope in a hopeless childhood. The man who had taught him, without knowing it, how to be cool. Dean smiled that easy smile. Hey, Pally. Good to see you back. Elvis swallowed hard. Thank you, Mr. Martin. Dean, call me Dean. Yes, sir, Dean. Dean gestured to the girl beside him. Elvis, this is my daughter, Deanna. Elvis looked at the young girl. She was maybe 12 years old, looking up at him with wide eyes. And in that moment, Elvis Presley, the most famous man in America, felt the need to pay tribute. He leaned down to Deanna. He lowered his voice. And he said the words that had been burning inside him for a decade. Deanna, they call me the king of rock and roll, but your dad is the king of cool. Deanna's eyes went wide. She looked at her father. Dean Martin was speechless. For once in his life, the man who always had a quip, always had a comeback, always had a way to deflect sincerity with humor, had nothing to say. Elvis straightened up. He nodded at Dean, and then he got back on his bicycle and rode away, leaving Dean Martin standing in the California sunshine, wondering if he had just imagined the whole thing. 10 years passed. Elvis made movies. Bad movies. Dozens of them. His career sputtered. His music became a punchline. The Beatles invaded America, and suddenly the king of rock and roll seemed like a relic of a bygone era. But Dean Martin? Dean Martin thrived. In 1964, Dean released Everybody Loves Somebody. It was a lush romantic ballad, the kind of song that shouldn't have stood a chance against the British invasion. But Dean Martin didn't care about musical revolutions. He just sang the song the way he sang every song. With ease, with warmth, with that indefinable cool. And on August 15th, 1964, Everybody Loves Somebody, not the Beatles, A Hard Day's Night, off the #1 spot on the Billboard charts. Dean Martin had done what no American artist had been able to do. He had beaten the Beatles, and he had done it without breaking a sweat. That night, Dean sent a telegram to Elvis Presley. It read, "If you can't handle the Beatles, I'll do it for you, Pally." Elvis read the telegram in his Graceland bedroom. He laughed out loud, and then he cried, because Dean Martin had remembered him. Dean Martin had thought of him. Dean Martin, in his moment of triumph, had reached out to the kid from Tupelo who had worshipped him since he was 13 years old. Elvis kept that telegram for the rest of his life. By 1969, Elvis was ready for a comeback. The television special had rekindled public interest. The movie career was dead, but the music was alive again. And Colonel Tom Parker had arranged the impossible, a residency at the International Hotel in Las Vegas. Elvis was terrified. Las Vegas was Dean Martin's town. Dean had been playing Vegas since the 1950s. He owned those showrooms. He was the standard by which all Vegas performers were measured. And now Elvis, at 34 years old, was going to step onto that same stage and try to prove he still mattered. The opening night in July 1969 was a triumph. Elvis was back. The crowds went wild. The critics raved. But throughout that entire run, through all those standing ovations and screaming fans, Elvis kept looking at the front row. He was looking for Dean. Dean never came. Elvis returned in January 1970 for his second Vegas residency. The shows were even better. He was more confident now. He had found his stage persona, the white jumpsuits, the karate moves, the dramatic scarves. He was no longer the hip-shaking teenager of the 1950s. He was something new, something powerful. And then, on January 26, 1970, Dean Martin walked into the showroom. Elvis saw him from the stage. The spotlight was blinding, but Elvis had trained himself to see into the darkness. He had learned to find the faces in the crowd. And tonight, there was only one face that mattered. Dean Martin was sitting in the front row. He was wearing a tuxedo. He was holding a drink. He was smiling that lazy smile, as if he had wandered into the showroom by accident and decided to stay. Elvis's band had just finished the intro to the next song. The musicians were waiting. 2,000 people were holding their breath. And Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was frozen. Then he did something he had never done before. He turned to his band leader, James Burton. He whispered something. James looked confused. He conferred with the other musicians. They nodded. Elvis turned back to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "we have a very special guest in the audience tonight. The man who taught me everything I know about being cool. The man who knocked the Beatles off the charts when nobody else could. The one and only ... Dean Martin." The spotlight swung to the front row. Dean raised his glass in acknowledgement. The crowd erupted, and then Elvis began to sing. Everybody loves somebody sometime. It was Dean's song. Dean's signature tune. The song that had defined his career. And Elvis Presley was singing it directly to him, looking him in the eyes, paying tribute to his idol in front of 2,000 witnesses. Elvis didn't sing the whole song. Just a few bars. Just enough to make his point. When he finished, he pointed at Dean and said, "That's for you, Pally." Dean Martin laughed. That big, warm, genuine laugh that had charmed America for 30 years. He stood up from his seat. He raised his glass toward the stage, and then Dean Martin did something that shocked everyone in that room. He bowed. Dean Martin, the king of cool, the man who never showed excessive emotion, the man who treated everything like a joke, bowed to Elvis Presley. It lasted only a second. A slight incline of the head, a gesture of respect from one king to another. But everyone who saw it understood what it meant. Dean Martin was saying thank you. Thank you for carrying the torch. Thank you for keeping the music alive. Thank you for remembering where you came from. Elvis's eyes welled with tears. He quickly looked away, launching into Proud Mary to hide his emotion. But those who were close enough to the stage could see his hands trembling. The boy from Tupelo had finally received the blessing of his hero. After the show, Elvis sent a message to Dean's dressing room. He wanted to meet. He wanted to talk. He wanted to tell Dean everything. About the radio in Tupelo. About the black hair dye. About the telegram that still sat in a drawer at Graceland. But Dean had already left. He had slipped out, through a back entrance, the way he always did. Avoiding the crowds. Avoiding the fuss. Just a man in a tuxedo, walking into the Las Vegas night, a half smile on his face. They never had that conversation. Elvis would die 7 years later, alone in his bathroom at Graceland, 42 years old. His body broken by pills and loneliness. Dean would live until 1995. But he died inside in 1987, when his son's plane crashed into a mountain. Two kings. Two legends. Two men who understood each other without ever really knowing each other. Years later, Deanna Martin would tell the story of that day on the Paramount lot. She would describe the look on Elvis's face when he leaned down to her. She would talk about the reverence in his voice when he called her father the king of cool. Elvis adored my father, she said. And I think, in his own way, my father adored him back. They were both outsiders who became kings. They both knew what it was like to come from nothing and have the whole world watching you. They understood each other. The world remembers Elvis Presley as a revolutionary. The man who invented rock and roll. The rebel who shook his hips and scandalized America. But Elvis knew the truth. He was just a poor kid from Mississippi who wanted to be Dean Martin. And on that night in Las Vegas, for one beautiful moment, he was. This is Dean Martin. The untold legacy. If this story moved you, if you never knew that the king of rock and roll worshiped the king of cool, hit that like button. Share this with someone who loves old Hollywood, and make sure you're subscribed. Because next we're going to explore the heartbreaking night Dean Martin walked off the stage forever, leaving Frank Sinatra alone in the spotlight with tears in his eyes. Until then, keep swinging, Polly. And remember, even kings have heroes.